Right. Morning, everyone, and thank you very much for coming today. Just to introduce myself, before we get started with this very exciting panel on which is going to be focused on showcasing decarbonisation technologies. My name is Brian Sullivan. I'm the Executive Director of IPECA, which gives me the privilege of spending all my working life advancing climate action, protecting biodiversity, protecting communities and promoting sustainability, and the chance to have a significant impact because of who we work with, which is our members. We're an industry association, and our members comprise the leading oil and gas companies, or oil, gas and increasingly renewables companies from around the world, responsible for about half the world's oil and gas production. To be members of IPECA, they have to align with the IPECA principles, which includes support for key UN agreements aligned with our four main themes of climate, nature, people and sustainability, and also deliver performance and good practices which align with those UN agreements. And so principle number one is support the Paris agreements. Principle number two is about practices and operations that comply and align with that agreement. And that highlights our role, which is to be the link between the industry and the United Nations. And we're not a lobby group. Our job is mainly to listen and to promote, raise awareness of what's going on at the UN to our members and encourage alignment where it makes sense to do so. We've been going for almost 50 years. Next year is our 50th anniversary. Throughout that time, since pretty much the beginning of the UNFCCC processes, we have been attending the Conference of the Parties, such as this one. Our role here is not to lobby, it's not to interfere with the processes, it's to showcase support, listen more than anything else to stakeholders and to hear the dialogue that's going on, and feedback to our members to explain what's happening, what the temperature is, and make recommendations for the work we can do as an association to support that. A good example of the work we're doing is you can see a QR code there on the slide, which links to our net zero emissions briefing, which was produced recently to highlight the role of oil and gas in supporting a just transition, recognising regional complexities of a net zero future and the need for collaboration to scale up energy transition enablers. But the best way to decarbonise is to avoid emissions, but when this is not possible, it's important to have technology available to help that. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So I'd like to thank our panellists. We've got a great lineup. Before Charbel Moussa here takes over as moderator, I'd like to invite Professor Bob Stavins of Harvard Kennedy School to come to the podium to give his keynote. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
So thank you very much. I really appreciate that. It's wonderful to be with a group with old friends, good friends like Ho-Sung Lee, who I've known so well and worked so closely with over the years, but also a whole set of people who I hope will be new friends. So I was asked to provide setting the scene comments. And I interpreted that because it's IPECA and we're located in Ayita, that I should focus on opportunities and challenges for the market-based policies, in particular for the energy transition. Now I'm going to start by recognizing that policy analysts, whether they're in academia and government and private industry and NGOs, recognize that carbon pricing is favored, at least in the long term, favored in normative terms, not necessarily in positive terms. And it's for three reasons, none of which are ideological. The first one is feasibility. There is no other feasible approach that could possibly bring about meaningful emission reductions, by which I mean the Paris targets, in large, complex economies other than carbon pricing, because of the, we're talking about hundreds of millions of very diverse sources and couldn't be addressed through conventional policies. And by carbon pricing, by the way, of course, I mean either trading regimes or carbon taxes. Secondly, it's the least costly approach because marginal abatement costs are highly heterogeneous across sources, so a market-based approach has the effect of all sources eventually controlling at the same marginal cost, hence cost effectiveness being achieved. And third, because market-based approaches, if they're properly structured with themselves a long time horizon, can bring about carbon-friendly technological change, which is so important. And when I say technological change, I'm not referring simply to fusion of existing technologies, but very much in keeping with the theme of the panel that will follow, innovation of new technologies. Having said this, we should take note of the fact that even a narrow-minded neoclassical economist like myself would recognize that carbon pricing may be necessary eventually, but not sufficient. And that's because there are other market failures. Two stand out and I think are well known. One is the principal agent problem associated with energy efficiency investments in renter-occupied structures, whether they're commercial, industrial, or residential. And the other, which is even more important, is the public good nature of information and information spillovers, which means that there's an under-incentive, even with correct carbon pricing, there's an under-incentive to invest in basic R&D. And finally, there's the gradual turnover of capital stock, which is important for infrastructure transformation, such as in the case of charging stations to support the use of electric vehicles. So the theme that I'm going to offer to you here is the promise but also the peril of carbon markets, or more conventionally, advantages and disadvantages. I'm going to start, since we're in the international domain here at a conference of the parties, I'm going to start by reflecting on the fact that there is precedent from the Kyoto Protocol. I don't think it's good precedent, but there's precedent. One is Article 17, which some of you may recall was international emissions trading. I wrote in 1999 with Bob Hahn from Oxford that it would fail because of the fact that the agents who are supposed to be doing the trading, namely nation states, countries, are not cost minimizers, and they don't have sufficient information about abatement costs within their borders, even if they were cost minimizers. And the other, of course, is the emission reductions credit program that's in the Kyoto Protocol, the Clean Development Mechanism, which has the fundamental challenge that, in my view, all emission reduction credit programs have, namely credits are created when someone performs beyond what they would normally do. And what they would normally do is, of course, an unobserved and a fundamentally unobservable hypothetical. And that, in my mind, is the ultimate failure of emission reduction credit programs compared with a cap-and-trade system. So with that, then, let's use that precedent to think about the Paris Agreement. My take on this is that there are three distinct levels of action. One are national policy instruments in different countries. They can be heterogeneous. They could be a cap-and-trade system, a carbon tax, a performance standard. And then, secondly, a linkage agreement can be formed between those two jurisdictions. A linkage agreement allowing then essentially a trading, allowing it but not requiring it. The linkage agreements exist, of course, between California and Quebec, between the European Union and Switzerland, and there are others as well. And then, thirdly, private sector entities, corporations, companies, compliance entities can then trade internationally, cross-border, because there is a linkage agreement. Now, none of that says anything about the Paris Agreement, so where does the Paris Agreement come in? Because of the fact that Article 6, in particular Article 6.2, can facilitate, and because of facilitating, thereby encouraging trading to take place and linkages to be formed. There's a problem and an opportunity. The opportunity is that Article 6.2, as an accounting mechanism, provides that home in the Paris Agreement to facilitate linkage and to encourage linkage and thereby to encourage international trade. The problem, of course, is there could be double counting, right, of achievement of an NDC, and this is what the Article 6.2 accomplishes. It can accomplish is preventing double counting, as I've written about in a couple of articles in Science over the last 3 years or so, and that's through the existence of the ITMOs and compensating adjustments. On the other hand, there are problems here, or potential problems, which unfortunately I've been observing. And they are that if the Paris Agreement's Article 6.2 is treated like Article 17, i.e. country-country trading and exchanging money or whatever between countries, the result's going to be the same, limited use, approximating zero in terms of any significance. Or if Article 6.2 becomes the home for project-based emission reductions credit exchanges, which really belong in 6.4, since 6.4 is intended to be the clean development mechanism on steroids, then we're going to see the same result. Again, the unobservable hypothetical, and it's not going to be, in my opinion, terribly useful. And then those problems, which are endemic to 6.4, I feel, would infect 6.2, which is not a desirable outcome. So, what then about Article 6? So, it can be viewed, I want to emphasize, as going beyond carbon dioxide. I'm saying this partly because I'm now directing at Harvard a university-wide, very ambitious initiative on research and outreach on reducing global methane emissions with 9 different research projects in our first year. But it's important in and of itself, as we're all seeing at this COP. I mean, the amount of attention given to methane at this COP compared to the last one is actually quite breathtaking. Well, intergas trades present one issue. It's not a insurmountable challenge, but how do you measure? You have to convert everything to some kind of equivalence. Obviously, the phrase has always been CO2 equivalence, traditionally going way back when in the IPCC, we looked at 100-year equivalents. More recently, there's been alternatively or in addition looking at 20-year time horizons for calculating CO2 equivalents of methane. If you do that, of course, methane looks 80 times as important rather than 20 times as important. The economist's answer, by the way, is neither of those. The economic answer is look at the present discounted value of the future stream of damages from a unit of CO2, look at the present discounted value of the future stream of damages from a unit of methane, divide one by the other, and that ratio is the appropriate ratio for trading. That's how the equivalence. Now, if you do that, it turns out not to be terribly different than the 100-year time horizon. It's not the same, but it's not a terribly large departure from that. Now, another approach, which I think I'm going to more or less finish with, is the other principal form of carbon pricing, of course, can be used, namely carbon taxes. And as you may know, in the new U.S. legislation, the Inflation Reduction Act, there is a methane fee. We don't like to use the word tax in the United States. So there's a methane fee. Another possibility is to adopt the model from the European Union of the CBAM, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. And there could be, in fact, a carbon border adjustment mechanism for methane. And in fact, a colleague of mine who's now at MIT, Catherine Wolfram, as part of our Harvard initiative, has carried out research together with Kim Klossing of UCLA Law School, developing a MBAM, if you will, which is now, I think as of today or sometime this week, being delivered to the White House from a set of co-signers who may be sponsoring legislation. So this approach is straightforward. Because of time, I won't say more about it, but there is a link to it on our website. So finally, the big problem with carbon pricing are not technical problems. What's limiting carbon pricing is, of course, politics. Largely, that's all that it is in my country, in the United States. So are there ways to make carbon pricing, whether it's a tax or a trading system, more politically acceptable? Let me finish with 3 suggestions. One is judicious policy design, which would depart from what economists call first best. In other words, phase in the caps over time, rather than using what might be the dynamically efficient path, which might be too politically challenging. Secondly, earmark the revenues of a tax or auction to finance additional climate mitigation, which certainly makes the environmental advocacy community very happy, rather than using the rebates to cut distortionary taxes, which is the economist's first best because it lowers net social cost, or use the revenue for fairness purposes, which is what's now happening, I think, increasingly around the world, and it's in several pieces of U.S. legislation. It can be lump sum rebates, rebates that target low-income areas, rebates that target areas that are going to really be hurt by the climate policies, such as areas dependent upon coal mining. And this then takes the form of either it's called a carbon dividend or a cap and dividend program, which we're going to have in Washington State in the U.S., depending on if it's tax or trading. Another approach, a second approach, is better design of what are really second best non-pricing programs, such as clean energy standards. And in the U.S., the Biden administration has made the choice not to go with pricing regimes, not to go with carrots, but to go almost 100%, but to go almost 100% with sticks, mainly in the form of subsidies and regulations. And that's because politicians prefer to give out benefits rather than costs. The third and final approach is to combine all of these and to say that for the long term, and I hope what will be discussed here, is that there is a reason for ongoing research on carbon pricing as long as it's carried out within the context of what is politically possible. I'm going to leave you with some website, the Harvard Project on Climate Agreements, the Harvard Environmental Economics Program, my own website, my blog, Twitter, and the new Salada Institute for Climate and Sustainability, or easier yet, if you'd like to be on the mailing list for any of these institutions, give me a business card afterwards, or my colleague Jason Chapman, who's with me, give him a business card. And I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Robert, for this overview over the several mechanisms of carbon price, let's call it. You touch at the end on the different policy tools that could be deployed, let's say, or could be designed for a certain carbon price. I would like to bridge from that to an economist point of view and ask you, maybe from an economist point of view, what are the pros and cons of a carbon price versus an incentive versus a trading, like a carbon or carbon tax, right, in order to incentivize the deployment of green technologies? And I'm hoping this will also be a bridge later on to the discussion in our session that will focus more on the technologies themselves, right? But I would like to understand maybe, or hear your views on, again, from an economist point of view on that.
So the two principal carbon pricing mechanisms, a carbon tax and a carbon cap and trade system, are fundamentally symmetrical. In fact, a question that I give my class at Harvard for many years now is, here's a cap and trade system. I list all the elements of it in terms of its design a carbon tax system which is absolutely equivalent overall in efficiency, cost effectiveness, as well as distributional across different groups. So carbon tax and cap and trade, either one can be designed to be like the other. More important, in my view, than the choice between a tax and a trading regime is the design of either one. In other words, it's a continuous spectrum from what you could call a pure carbon tax to a pure cap-and-trade system. And cap-and-trade systems that have a price collar, as in California, they're a hybrid right in the middle, and that's what we increasingly see. So either system can be designed to have achieve cost effectiveness in the short term and also to achieve dynamic incentives for technological change in the long term.
And in this context, in Europe now, there is the big CBAM. We're starting in October. Many companies are starting to prepare. How does this then CBAM fits into what you just mentioned? And do you see it as a first step maybe towards a global type of cap and trade that we've been talking about maybe for the last 20 or so years, but we've never been able yet to achieve?
So economists and political scientists, for that matter, for years have studied and proposed what they referred to as a club in order to deal with climate change. And instead of trying to get 195 parties to the UNFCCC to agree, as we do obviously in these COPs, instead recognize that there are 20 countries and regions, counting the EU as one, that account for 85 to 90% of emissions, and try to get them to agree, whether that's within the G20 or a new group, the C30, including some of the most vulnerable countries. So either way, that can be accomplished. The CBAM, which is essentially a border adjustment mechanism, and whether it was put in place because European industry was worried about a loss of competitiveness and they lobbied for it, or whether it was put in place because some analysts thought that this was a way of inducing other countries to adopt climate policies, to me it doesn't matter. That's the motivation. It's in place. We have it. And it's going to soon come into force. When you talk with people from developing countries about it, they become virtually apoplectic because it just looks like the rich world once again trying to screw us, that what this is essentially protectionism. And it's going to hurt, our industries. And there's validity to that. It is protectionist. It's not protectionist in a legal sense because the same carbon price is being faced by European domestic industry. So it doesn't violate the WTO by any means. Whether or not it therefore evolves into an enlarged climate club by inspiring other countries to take action, and I think it will. I'm actually doing, on the outside of my academic hat, consulting for 2 countries who want to design domestic climate policies so that they don't face the CBAM in a couple of years. So it's real. Whether it leads eventually to an expansion of the coalition and a wonderful climate club, or it's a downward spiral into environmental protectionism, with the U.S. being next, and then maybe China, and so on and so forth. And I think it's too early to say. If anyone says they know which way it's going, they're operating on the basis of priors, not on the basis of empirical evidence, because we're going to have to wait and see.
Thank you so much. I hope we hear a little bit more your views later on in the discussion on those topics, but very, very important. Thank you. Before going into the panel discussion, I would like to point out, and this is again on the direction of IPCA, that there will be a report out of the session that will be pushed or distributed to all IPCA members. So just to mention that summary notes will be taken, a briefing report will be done, and you might receive it yourself, but other members will also receive it. So again, thank you so much. I would like to start with Irene, if I say your name correctly. Yeah, very good. Irene is EVP of Marketing, Midstream and Processing at Equinor. What I would like to do is first start with Irene and then pass it to the gentleman, maybe to hear a little bit first your views on the decarbonization technologies in your own operation, in your own region. And hopefully this will give us a first view of the different learning or maybe challenges in the different region, different technologies. And then after that, I would like to open the floor also to the audience to have a little bit of discussion, starting with what Professor Robert mentioned, but maybe learning from one another. So, Irene.
Well, thank you so much, and thanks for having me. And I'd like to have a go at the first question for the, is it a cap and trade or is it carbon tax? And I think from an investor perspective, what's extremely important is predictability. So when you're sitting in EU these days and you're trying to guess what the EU ETS is going to be 20 years down the road, that's very, very hard. But if there is a predictable tax regime, that's easier for the investments at least. So predictability would be very keen from our side. But that's necessarily not what I wanted to talk about, but indirectly it's extremely relevant. So I think if you ask anyone in IPCC or anyone else that has tried to come up with the net zero scenario, they would say at least two things. One is that we need to start reducing emissions urgently. And the other thing is we need a massive amount of new, reliable, clean energy. And I'm going to spend maybe the next 5 minutes trying to argue that CCS is relevant for both of those challenges. So I'm from Equinor, a Norwegian previous national oil and gas company, now a broad publicly traded energy company, and we have more than 27 years of experience from storing CO2. We've been storing CO2 from two of our gas fields, Snøhvit and Sleipner. And I think the most important learning from that experience is that it is safe. We can prove that there's been no leakages. We have a constant monitoring of the field over that period. We can prove that there's no safety incidents, and we have basically made all the data available, so everyone who wants it can access that information. So our intention is to build on that experience and become one of the leading transportation and storage, or CO2 transportation and storage operator, serving, being a service provider for large industrial emitters. And I think it is important that we talk about emissions from industries and not necessarily about the oil and gas industry's own emissions. This goes way beyond that. And why is industries important? Well, 25% of the emissions are currently coming from industries, and it's coming from typically their chemical processes, not from the use of energy. So if you take the cement industry, for instance, 7% of the global emissions are currently coming from cement factories. 2/3 of that is coming from the calcination process. 1/3 is coming from the energy use. You could argue that the energy use could, you could switch and use renewable, but you need actually such high temperatures that electrification is not going to do it. You need something that is burning. And then the 2/3, there's no other solution today than actually capturing and storing the CO2. And we think CCS is vital, actually, at least to maintain industries in Europe and in the US or the Western world going forward. We need carbon capture and storage. We are part of a governmental backed project in Norway called the Longship, and it's a full CCS value chain. It's capturing from industrial emissions, transportation via vessels, and then storing it under the Norwegian continental shelf. And I think it's interesting to take a look at why we managed to get that together. And I think there's one vital thing. There was no chicken and egg situation in this situation, because the government actually facilitated funding of all parts of the value chain. And we could actually start together, because the big problem these days is who blinks first, who develops a project, or is it the project side or is it the market side? And none of them are actually blinking. So I think we should learn from that. But the government set it up, so we had to take some risk. The storage was not fully booked by the two governmental backed industries. Since then, we've had tremendous interest in this, and we are now fully booked, and we've signed commercial contracts with Yara, it's a fertilizer plant, and Ørsted, which is a bio-waste management plant. And the latter one is quite interesting because it allows us to get into a negative emission situation because it's capturing CO2 from a bio plant. So as of today, 4 very different industries, but all large global emitters that we need to attack. The second point where I do also think CCS is relevant is within the power systems, because with the emergence and the massive influx, I guess, of intermittent renewable, you need something to back it up. For a long period, I think people thought that, battery technology, interconnectors would solve that issue. That's not happening. We haven't seen the breakthrough in battery technology that allows us to back up for an extended period of time. Interconnectors, we need massive investments in the grids prior to the interconnectors. So there is a solution for this, gas-fired power plants, obviously a lot better than coal. But I and my company and many with us would argue that you need to also decarbonize that. And you can do that either through CCS, or you can make them run on hydrogen, and then blue hydrogen, converting natural gas into hydrogen by storing the CO2. So I think, at least in Europe, people have now recognized this, and it's not that long ago since Germany acknowledged that they will need somewhere between 17 and 25 gigawatts of hydrogen-ready CCGTs. We are actively investing in this space, both in the UK, Germany, and the Netherlands and Belgium, because we think it is going to be absolutely vital for the success of renewable. It actually is paving the way for more renewable in the mix. So I've probably exhausted my time already, but I was asked to say a few words about what is needed for CCS to really scale up. And we've touched upon one of them already. The cost of emitting needs to be higher than the cost of storing. I would argue with the 45Q in the US, we are in such a scenario already, particularly for all the industries at the Gulf Coast that have easy access to CO2 storage. We're getting there in the EU. We estimate that you would need at least 100 euro per ton EU ETS cost to cover the cost of capturing and storing. So currently, it's not enough. You also need some help on the capturing side. But we also need to see the emergence of clean markets or green markets. We need to see that whoever capture the CO2 from the respective production, whether it's cement, whether it's steel, aluminium, they need to be able to get a higher price for their products. And there is a tiny signs that this is happening, but it's not happening rapidly enough. As an industry, we need to work on the cost. We need to get the cost down. What we are currently looking at is to introduce pipelines rather than vessels. We believe by doing that, we can take down cost with 50%. Our primary project is to build a pipeline from the heavily industrialized Antwerp and Ghent area up to the Norwegian continental shelf. So very optimistic. And then the governments need to make CO2 licenses available at scale and at speed. And the last point, we need regulation around transportation, for instance, on CO2, and we need to speed up permitting as we do for every clean or transition technology that we are looking at. So thanks for the opportunity to touch upon this.
Some notes. I would like to touch base on some of the ideas, but maybe next moving to Vijay. Vijay, Senior Director at Exxon Climate Strategy and Technology. We spoke before this session. You have done research into decarbonization for a long, long time, so really looking forward to hearing your input.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you for reminding me why I didn't go to Harvard. I don't think I've been able to answer that question, but let's connect a couple of dots here, right? So technology and policy have to go together if we're going to do this. And so the fact that we have a keynote speech, which is largely policy driven, followed by a bunch of folks talking about technology, is why we have these sessions. Collaboration can be done on very, very different levels. That's a form of collaboration that is often not thought about. Let's think about a second topic that is danced around but isn't actually talked about, and that's scale. This is a scale problem like nothing we have ever seen. And there's two dimensions to this scale. The first one everybody kind of gets, and that's the magnitude, the absolute dimensions. Nobody understands our units. Nobody knows what an exajoule is. Nobody knows what a terawatt is, right? Our units don't make any sense. And on a PowerPoint chart, they all look the same because everything's normalized on a PowerPoint chart, right? But the scale of this industry is absolutely astounding. Magnitude. But the second thing, which Bob was actually talking about, is the geographic spread of this, the scale of the geographies you have to cover, and the fact that it's really unlikely that one geography's energy solutions will actually be another region's energy solutions makes the trading and makes all these things that much harder because you're not moving a like molecule around. You're moving a like unit of energy around, but you're not moving a like molecule around. And how do you think about that? So with that as context, let's go back to what we're supposed to talk here, which is technology. Because the other thing that has to be said is we don't have the technology set. And I would pose to you that if we say that we got an economics issue, we really have a technology issue. Because if the technology is not economic, it's not a technology solution. And again, the economics have to be both cost and scale. So if you can do it economically, but you can't scale it, it's not a solution. So we have to think about what we're doing. And the final concept, before I get into stuff that Exxon is actually doing, let's remember there's two fundamental pieces of energy. And if you had an unlimited amount of these two things, you could do whatever you want to do in energy. So if you had unlimited electrons and unlimited carbon-hydrogen bonds, so molecules. If you had unlimited electrons and unlimited molecules, you can do whatever you want to do. The question is, how do you get the electron and how do you get the molecule? So let's come back to us, because you asked to speak a little bit about what our companies are doing and how we choose what we're doing, because no one company can do everything. So we focus on where our capabilities make a difference. We've been at this, everyone on the stage, we've been at this 140 years, okay? And we've invented a lot of the conversion chemistries that are used in energy today, which means we're on the molecule side. So we know how to take a molecule and convert a molecule to what you guys want. So whether it's the carpeting, whether it's your clothes, whether it's your medicine, whether it's your plastic bags, whether it's your fuel, that's conversion chemistry. That's what we do. That's very energy intensive. So not only is energy itself emissions, but the process to convert the energy source to the energy carrier is energy intensive. So how do you decarbonize the actual carbon? Well, that's CCS is one. That's certainly a good thing. Things we're working on, I know these guys are going to talk about other things. I'm going to talk about two things that we're doing in addition to what they're doing. One is hydrogen. So what is hydrogen? Hydrogen is the smallest element, right? It's number one on the periodic table. Two hydrogens become a molecule. Hydrogen combusts, it burns. But when it combusts, it makes water. So now the question is, how do you make the hydrogen? So now we've got to play connect the dots. Because if you start with natural gas and you do a conversion step to get to hydrogen, you then have to add on CCS. So CCS can fill a lot of roles here, but it can also help you get hydrogen. And that type of hydrogen, there's all sorts of different colors of hydrogen, but that type of hydrogen is scalable today. And so one of the things we have to do is work with folks that are writing policies and say, how do you get to scale today? Because the other technologies are not ready for scale. Blue hydrogen is ready for scale. The project we're advancing is actually 10% of Biden's target for hydrogen. You get there with one project. That's very hard to do with any other technology. So hydrogen is one thing we're working on. The other one is, let's think about thermodynamics for a minute. So if you can do cap and trade problems at Harvard, I'll do a thermodynamics chemical engineering problem. And here's the fact. If you're going to fly an airplane, you need a liquid hydrocarbon. There is no way around that, guys. That's energy intensity. That's energy density. That is what it takes thermodynamically to move an airplane in the sky. how do you decarbonize the hydrocarbon that's going to go into the fuel? You think about biofuels. Bio is CCS, right? Photosynthesis is CCS, CO2 out of the air. You convert it to energy. So take the bio, that's bringing CO2 out, turn it into fuel. So when you burn the CO2, it, within the first approximation, balances, and you have a carbon neutral fuel. Can you do that at scale? Okay, well, to do that at scale, let's remember a very, very important piece here. Repurposing the capital deployed in this industry. So biofuels, if done properly, can repurpose a lot of assets we have today. So the projects we're advancing are actually taking biofuels into existing infrastructure, existing assets to do this. So as we get into discussion, I could talk about this forever. Policy, technology interface, all of the above technology, regional discrepancies. Final thing, you sort of danced around this, you gotta have a carbon accounting system. And the carbon accounting system has to follow thermodynamic principles, meaning it has to material balance. Double counting is not allowed in chemical engineering. Everything has to material balance. So you've got to material balance. If we can come up with a carbon accounting system that material balances, we're going to make a lot of the things that Bob talked about a whole lot easier. So I'll leave it at that, but thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you, Vijay. I really love your question. How do you decarbonize carbon itself? On that, you have current carbon emission, CCS, solvent, and then you have the historical carbon. Steve, President and General Manager of 1.5 from Oxy, I think you're going to talk about direct air capture, which touch base on the point of historical carbon to be decarbonized. But the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks again for the invitation to speak here among this tremendous panel. So, direct air capture, let's just step back a second. Any scenario to net zero in 2050, it's acknowledged that we're going to need negative emissions. We're going to need removals to fill a gap at the end to deal with residuals. And there are lots of numbers out there as to what that is going to be, whether it's 5 gigatons, 10 gigatons. It's an extremely large number, way more than anything that's being achieved today. So that's the backdrop. What are we, 1.5? We're a subsidiary of Occidental. We are an integrated CCUS platform with a focus on direct air capture. We have a sequestration business. We're building out sequestration hubs in the Texas, Louisiana Gulf Coast, which has already been mentioned. And we also have investments in a number of utilization technologies. But I'm going to focus on the direct air capture piece of this. We partnered with Carbon Engineering. Oh, first of all, why did we do this in the first place? We as a company, we've got a long history of handling CO2, of extracting CO2 from processes and then injecting it into reservoirs. 5 decades of experience in managing EOR processes. So a very deep understanding of the behavior of CO2 in transportation and in reservoir rock. And as we approach the energy transition, we look at what is it that we can offer either uniquely or as a specialist, and that carbon management is what we see as our particular skill set, rather than trying to convert ourselves to become a renewable energy provider. We will use those energy sources, but we're going to focus on being a carbon management company. So Oxy's Low Carbon Ventures division was established to look at what are the technologies that we can hitch ourselves to. We looked at direct air capture, what was available out there at the time, and we landed on Carbon Engineering's technology as the one that was most likely to be able to scale. We were focused on what is it that we're going to be able to get to scale, and what are we going to be able to get prices down to something where it can become a commodity. And Carbon Engineering was established in 2009. They're a long way along the journey. A lot of people are starting out in direct air capture in more recent times, but Carbon Engineering's story starts in 2009. 2015, they're extracting their first CO2 directly from the atmosphere in a pilot plant. They then a number of investors have come in. We went in as a major investor in around about 2018. They established an innovation center. So this is it's not really strictly speaking a pilot plant. It's a plant where we test out innovations and improvements in the technology. But in terms of scale, it's about 1,000 tons per year of CO2. And now our journey's continued on. We've now acquired Carbon Engineering, so they're now a wholly owned subsidiary of Oxy. And we are midway through, about 35% through the construction of the first megaton scale direct air capture plant. So that's being built in West Texas. It's going to be 500,000 tons a year of CO2 removal from the atmosphere, sequestered in saline aquifers. And it's going to be complete by the end of next year, and we'll be fully operational on that by mid-2025. We've also announced plans to deploy between 100 and 135 1 megaton plants by 2035. We've tied up sequestration pore space in a number of sequestration hubs in Texas, Louisiana, as I said, and identified places where we're going to build out very large direct air capture plant deployment. An example is the King Ranch facility in South Texas, close to Corpus Christi, where we're going to be able to put about 30 1 megaton plants. And just lastly, my responsibility is with 1.5 International is we're really just a small business development team. We're looking to deploy the technology outside of the US. It was mentioned earlier about the different geographies. Things are going to be differently deployed in different parts of the world. Some places are going to be well suited for this kind of technology. The great thing about negative emissions, about direct air capture, it really is location agnostic. It doesn't matter where you remove the CO2 from the atmosphere and permanently store it. So we look for places where there's ample geologic storage, good access to zero emissions power, and we're agnostic about what zero emissions power means. It can be renewable, it can be nuclear, it can be conventional thermal with CCS, or it could be. And we're investors in Net Power, which is a new technology for oxy-combustion of hydrocarbon gas, which produces pure CO2, and the CO2 is the motive fluid in the turbine, pipeline ready for sequestration. So. And we look all of those different locations that we can look at putting this technology in will not necessarily be the places where there's going to be demand where for that residual emission. So there's going to be places that are going to be ill suited for either cost reasons or lack of access to sequestration. So we need to have an international approach that includes the ability to move a CDR, a negative emission credit, across borders.
Thank you, Steve. I think later on in the discussion, I would like to touch exactly on this point, because not many of us today know the difference between CCS and direct air capture, especially, okay, maybe the sources are not the same, but what is after the source? What is after the capture? And a little bit maybe of discussion from a geological point of view, location point of view, network point of view, but let's leave there. And maybe, thanks, Lorena. I will switch the mic. This is easier. So I will take this. Okay, because otherwise the line will be too long. Ambassador Hoysung, after the policy side, the technology implementation side, it's working. I think it's working. I would like to hear from you as a capacity first of a former chair of IPCC and today the president of the Carbon Free Alliance. From a science maybe perspective, joining deployment with policy, with economics, where we are not doing very well, why we are not deploying as fast as the world or climate need us to deploy. The floor is yours.
I hope I have the perfect answer, but let's see. One of the IPCC's very important findings was the estimate of carbon budget, and you all know that. And the conclusion was if the current this BAU continues, then there's no way the 1.5 could be achieved. And in fact, the infrastructure, the current emissions from the current infrastructure will exhaust the carbon budget in about in about 10 years, something like that. And then the second important message was, although not well known, was that the infrastructure, the difference between the developing world and developed world, and the measure of the stock of infrastructure in the developing world is about 20% of the stocks of infrastructure in the developed world. So therefore, there's huge, tremendous demand for infrastructure investment in the developing world. That's obvious, we all expect so. But imagine that the materials that will be put into that infrastructure building will all come from the existing steel plant, existing cement plant, existing petrochemicals, all highly energy as well as carbon intensive. And IPCC's conclusion was, let's first decarbonize electricity, and then let's worry about, well, this decarbonizing the hard-to-abate sectors. I thought somehow the priority may be misplaced here. And probably we should, as well, while we consider about decarbonizing the electricity sector scope 2, but at the same time, one must also pay much more attention to the decarbonization in the scope 1 context. And you mentioned that the tremendous the emissions concentration from those materials sector. Let me give an example in the Korea perspective. 14 corporations in Korea account for about 35% of GDP, and they also account for about that much of a proportion in greenhouse gas emissions there. And they are the industrial corporations in the steel, petrochemical, automobile, and also the very electricity-intensive semiconductor industries. And obvious that decarbonization of those industries is very critical for Korea to deliver the promises made under NDCs. We also recognize, by looking at the countries in southeastern region and others, much of their increases in the carbon emissions were from these hard-to-abate sectors. And the products of those industries, many of them were exported to the regions of Europe, regions in North America. It is obvious that if those factories of the world fail to decarbonize, then I think there's no point of really achieving, for all of us working together to contain the warming below 1.5. So the point is, we usually talk about first mover advantage or something similar in that context, but we also found that this first mover advantage may not exist in these hard-to-abate sectars like steel, cement, or petrochemicals, because those products are internationally traded in a very competitive market, and traditionally profit margins are very slim. And in the meantime, it is obvious that the traditionally produced materials will compete against these somewhat greener materials, which calls for obviously a public policy support to make the green materials to have an entry point in this very highly competitive, internationally competitive markets for key materials. So I think we have a job to do, both technology as well as public side to achieve a meaningful improvement in the scope 1 area.
Thank you, Ambassador. Anibor, I think there could have been no better introduction to your keynote than what Ambassador Hoysong mentioned. Developing countries, infrastructure need, hard-to-abate sector that you present, right, one of them in your role as an executive secretary of the African Refiner and Distributor. So looking at the time, just to keep a little bit of time, please, for discussion, if I may ask for about 5 or so minutes on your reflection also from your regional context. I know there is a lot. I'm sure you're going to have also maybe an intervention of what Dr. Robert mentioned, but the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thanks to IPICA for giving me the opportunity to speak today. I think my role here is to put a just transition overlay to this decarbonization discussion. So let's put this in perspective. 20 years ago this year, when I left MIT Sloan to go back to work for ExxonMobil, Nigeria was the #1 investment destination for oil and gas. ExxonMobil has divested from Nigeria. Equinor just divested from Nigeria. And these countries are being asked, they're losing investment, but they're being asked to look for funding to invest in decarbonization when they have only contributed 2.73% of all cumulative global emissions. Let's get that straight. Secondly, I left ExxonMobil about 8 years ago. I went to work for NNPC, where I ended up running all the refineries in Nigeria. So I got up close to see that it only was this year that we took all subsidies out. So we can't even afford to subsidize petrol. Yet in Africa, 1 in 2 people born globally is going to be African between now and 2040. Our energy demand is going to grow 45%. So for us, while we appreciate all the nuances, we need market-based decarbonization technology that will work now. Okay? As Vijay said, I just reminded him of this at the World Petroleum Congress, you have to have energy to transition. We don't have energy. So you can't tell us not to exploit our resources to get energy, and then you're telling us, oh, by the way, you have to invest in technology we can't afford with subsidies we don't have. So I just want to put that overlay. So from my perspective, being in the refining sector, yes, we do focus on carbon mitigation. We're not adapting. We're adapting, not mitigating. So we're looking at what would happen if we looked at our assets and tried to decarbonize existing emissions. The downstream that I represent contributes about 33% of all emissions to the oil and gas industry, so it's significant. So we've looked at stuff like the refinery in Cote d'Ivoire, where we said, all right, we worked with some of our partners, Vitol, advising, what can we do to reduce the carbon footprint of the refinery by 29%, and we found those kind of things. And the goal for that is to say, look, if you can do that in a refinery in Cote d'Ivoire that's 80,000 barrels a day, can we scale that up to Egypt, that's 800,000 barrels a day, and then start having a discussion about creating a global Pan-African carbon credits mechanism. So for me, if I'm looking at what I really would focus on the kind of technology that I can use today, things like, UOP's eco-refining processes that give me green diesel, that give me green jet fuel. Things like Cool LPG, that the Global LPG Partnership is working with GTI Energies, that's converting, using municipal waste and agricultural residue to give me bio-LPG. Because guess what? Even LPG is not seen as green. So getting the funding for the infrastructure you talked about is even more difficult. So getting the opportunity to scale up and use bio-LPG, one, reducing imports, thereby keeping more money to invest in this decarbonization, Cool LPG makes sense. And then low-carbon aviation fuel. Arena and I were talking about, everybody was excited last week. Was it last week? Richard Branson just flew with vegetable oil to New York. That's 0.1% of all aviation fuel. People can't even, and it's cost 3 times as much. People in Africa can't even afford to fly right now. You only triple the cost. And oh, by the way, the fuel won't be available. So let's talk about low-carbon aviation fuel. That's working. I think ICAO and Corsia have been endorsing it. It's going to reduce emissions by about 15%. Those are the kind of technologies that we can, because that is commercial. But anything, if you read the IEA's net zero emission report by 2050, it's very clearly stated. Majority of the technology required for net zero is in prototype or demo stage. We can't afford what we want to do now. Investment is leaving. We contributed 2.73%. So we can't afford, I mean, with all due respect, we'll listen. But we want you to understand that in Africa, we will decarbonize, but we need to develop our assets in the lowest carbon footprint possible with commercial technology. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anibor. Again, I think it's a beautiful quote. We need energy to transition. So I would like to open the floor, and I've been taking notes. I don't know where to start, so I will put this down because I would like to capture on the remaining time, bridging what Professor Robert said about different market have been approaching maybe the incentive or their market carbon design in different way. There is a lot of talk at the moment in Europe. We are following a little bit the hard approach, where in the US, given their liberal economic approach, they went more with the incentive, REA, etc., etc. Anibor, you mentioned about the need to be understood and supported. So my question here, and it's really open to everyone, is if we are to decarbonize, we cannot afford technology going in certain market versus the others. They need to be implemented, deployed across all regions in the world. So if we only follow where policies are better or providing a better environment, we are not doing good for the world. If we are only decarbonizing one region over the other, we are not doing good for the world. Hence my question, how can we increase partnerships across the value chain, which is de facto across many regions, in order then to really decarbonize scope 1, 2, and 3, which are material, right, that Ambassador Hoitsung spoke about. How can we improve this partnership and collaboration to scale up deployment of any type of low carbon or decarbonized technologies? Not sure if anyone would like to start first.
Really well said. So the theme of this COP is actually it's two themes. One is collaboration, and the other is, if I can go back to physics, it's not about speed, it's not about velocity, it's about acceleration. And the way you can accelerate is two things. One, you can collaborate, which is what we're talking about right here. So even with you don't need to do the technologies we're doing. You need to leapfrog. You need to look at what's in demonstration today and scale, because you can model and you can build off of that. That takes a different type of collaboration. The other thing you have to do is we can't do things in series. First thing you learn in physics is parallel processing beats series processing every day. So you got to do things in parallel, because it's not one exact solution, it's multiple solutions. So you have to have a portfolio approach of lots of different options running in parallel as you determine what you can do. The final thing is, and there were two big announcements this week. One is the Oil and Gas Decarbonization Charter, and then of course we joined OGMP. But let's put those two together for a minute, because the essence of the Oil and Gas Decarbonization Charter is collaboration and technology transfer. So let's help Nigeria by getting technology there. Let's teach. You don't need to learn everything. We've learned it. Let's technology transfer that. Let's transfer that learning, because then you can start where we are today instead of taking 140 years to get to where we are today. So I think there's no unique solution, but I think these discussions hopefully foster a lot more collaboration that's needed. Thanks, and thanks for raising that.
No, I guess my comments were kind of similar because I don't think we need to scale or should scale everything similarly across the world. I think we need to acknowledge that there are differences, and someone needs to take the lead, and someone needs to go through the learning curve, and then the developing world can basically piggyback on that. And one of the learning curve, the Europe and, the Western world has been through is getting the cost down on solar and onshore wind. And obviously, I think that's a technology that is available at, and it's cost competitive these days. And we had a discussion earlier today that it's not necessarily, the technology is working. I think financing will be there. But what's the challenge in, Africa, at least, or developing world? When I've looked into it, there's no rules around permitting. There's a lot of unclarity around land rights, land access. What are we going to do with respect to environmental impact studies? So I think we need to be out there and share that learning. And then I think you can leapfrog. You don't have energy, but you can leapfrog the coal and the rest of the world. But acknowledgement that energy transition is different in different places in the world, I think, is where we need to start. And you mentioned LPG. We're sending a lot of LPG to India. I think it's been a tremendous energy transition story, going from dung, wood, kerosene to LPG, cleaning up homes, saving lives, and it's a massive achievement and then fantastic energy transition that is totally under-communicated. So.
Thank you very much. Great comments. One thing about this COP, I must say, it's the first time you've ever had a national oil company CEO as COP president. So he understands the unique balance between energy security and energy transition. And that's something I think also needs to be factored in. The other thing is, can you raise your phone, please? Yes, fantastic. There was a time in the world where everybody invested in landlines. But that's what we're using today. So all we're saying is, can you guys, the 29 and 33% emitters, use the landline, and as you evolve to that, that's the version of the technology we want. So the guys who've done the 29%, 33% emissions, scale down and test version 1, version 2. Bring us version 5.0. In the meantime, can we at least have some ready market economic solutions to decarbonize as we make some investments, so we can actually, make some money. And the last thing, back to the point of Arena's point, we had a discussion about financing and the issue with financing. And I've been trying to share this message about the need for intentionality. Financing is the last part of the journey. The first part is, do you have the regulatory frameworks to support the investment over the investment horizon that are needed? Without that, you're not even going to get anywhere. Then the second part is, have we defined the scope, cost, and schedule of the projects we're trying to do? The third part is, what is the ESG overlay in today's world, right? But the fourth part, which I think is the most fundamental, is, do we have the people to execute the projects over this horizon? If we raise hands here, how many people in this room are going to be 40 years or younger by 2030? Because if you're not going to be involved in energy transition, you're just going to talk about it. So the question is, if you get all of those things right, then you have a discussion on financing. And that's what I think we really need to start talking about if we're really going to get any of this stuff done. Thank you.
I was going to just talk a little bit about sort of picking up on your point about differentiation between some of these types of technologies that we're talking about and getting it clear in people's mind what does something different. So I'm bringing the direct air capture perspective here, and I agree with a lot of what's been said. But I think it is important to understand, and it's important from a regulatory standpoint and in the design of carbon pricing systems to recognize that there are differences between the things that we're talking about, between CCS as a general rule and negative emissions, direct air capture included, as a specific case. So, to get to a net zero world, we have to do all of those things that we've been talking about in terms of getting renewable energy started, getting blue hydrogen started to stimulate the hydrogen infrastructure. We need to get better and more efficient in everything we do. We need to drive emissions down that way, and we need point source capture to ensure that anything that is being emitted, any carbon that is being moved from the geosphere, isn't getting into the atmosphere. But everything we do, and you made the example of aviation. It's a perfect example because it's right there and right now, and it's it's one of the few areas where there is an emerging compliance situation that the aviation industry is needing to address, where it doesn't matter what you do, all of these sustainable aviation fuels, et cetera, they're all going to have a residual that needs to be dealt with at the end of the journey. And what we would advocate for is to recognize that now, so that the technologies that are going to be in place to deliver gigatons of removals in the 2040s are getting to megatons of removals right now in this decade, and that kind of approach to policy can help us get started. You mentioned 45Q. Why are we building and being aggressive in our development and deployment of this technology in the United States? We have a clear business case to build in the US now, availing of $180 a ton of a tax credit for DAC source CO2 being saline sequestered. And then there is enough of a voluntary market out there at the moment to support the gap between that credit and the cost of capture as it exists today. But that's not going to be there forever. It's not a market size that's going to support multiple megaton DAC deployment plants. So, while we do our work, our responsibility is to drive the cost down. Then we need, at some point, the compliance market needs to meet that falling cost curve, and at that point we can proliferate into multiple plants. And then the other thing is in utilization of products and fuels. What direct air capture does is it brings you the ability to establish a truly circular, just like biosources do. We're bringing the CO2 out of the atmosphere, and it's an inexhaustible supply of CO2, whereas biosources of CO2 need land space, they need water, they need all of that. And then finally, at the end of the journey, will negative emissions also give the ability to then for climate restoration and actually bring CO2 levels in the atmosphere down. So, yeah, just wanted to add that.
Yes, we have seen many declarations and promises, pledges. The recent one is tripling of renewables capacity, doubling of efficiency, and then also tripling of the nuclear and other declaration, other initiatives. I welcome. That's fine, but those things may one believe to some wrong conclusion. And I think the important point I want to make is that we need to be technology neutral. Someone says that agnostic, fine. And second, I also wish we have some measure of a life cycle carbon footprint of products or any activities. And a third, IPCC has already mentioned very briefly, but some further understanding about the difference between the consumption-based carbon emissions and production-based carbon emissions. There's huge differences across the country, which has a very deep policy implications. And at the end, what matters is which option, which technologies or whatever activities may contribute to the carbon reductions in terms of a life cycle based carbon assessment, emissions assessment. And failing that, maybe we are looking at the wrong solutions. And so the analytic community as well as policy community have some further remaining task to complete to get us all to 1.5 stabilization climate goals.
Yeah, I just wanted to build a little bit on this because I think there is a tendency, at least among European regulators, that they want to detail all kinds of regulations and technology use. I think that's a mistake. I'd rather like the US approach where you have this carbon intensity. If you can meet the carbon intensity, whatever technology you use or however you get there, so trust us to develop the technology that's going to meet those criteria, either it's carbon intensity or value chain, CO2 footprint or something. Because right now, I don't think anyone is in a position, at least as a policymaker, to make sure they know what exactly is needed. So let the market work. Let the companies like ourselves with a lot of technologists in there that are doing our best. And I think that's clear recommendation, at least from my side. So I'm glad you picked it up.
No, thank you. I think markets work best when markets decide what is best. So I have plenty of questions, and I would like to pick on some of the comments said earlier, but I would like to see first if there is any question from the room. Okay. I would like to pick up on something, Irene, you said, Steve, you repeated also now in your intervention, that we need the cost of emission to be to be higher than the cost of storing, but I extend that to the cost of decarbonization. Now, the cost of decarbonization we can determine. It's the cost of energy. But how can we determine the cost of emitting? The cost of emitting is not a tangible product. Today, it could be a policy. It could be a social cost scientists are working on, right? And policymakers are really struggling when we speak to them on what is the cost. We talk about $100, about 170. Some economy can crumble if we even put 20, right? So I would like to a little bit hear your views, because it's very easy from a technology provider to say we want incentive, we want the cost of emission to be higher, but then if policymakers put a high price, technology providers start to scream sometime. So a little bit your views, how could you be incentivized, okay, from a policy, et cetera, but is it something that we need to accept that at beginning we have to put the money in technology in order to go through the development curve and make the return after 10, 15 years? Or we really need to keep pushing on this or hammering on this point of increase carbon price, increase carbon price, increase carbon price?
I can go first, yeah. Well, look, these are not one-dimensional questions you're asking.
I understand.
So let's talk about a different equilibrium, because I think that might help us address this question. Let's think about an equilibrium between policy, technology, and infrastructure, because those three have to go together. And let's think about each one of those three, what the important role they play. Technology is the technologies to get to scale, because if you don't get to scale, this is not going to do what we want it to do. Policy can inspire markets. So we've already established that starting with the market is hard. So a right policy that can kickstart a market, transition to a market, I think is important. So that's why you need to have the right policy early on. And then everybody's talked about infrastructure in one form or another, because the essence of energy that people forget is what really allows energy to be energy is moving the energy. And you can't move the energy without infrastructure. And the fact of the matter is, we're going to change the infrastructure for the energy of the future, just like we had to move the infrastructure 100 years ago, 1940s, for the type of energy we do today. So the pipelines are going to have to be different if you're moving hydrogen versus if you're moving LNG. The geological sequestration is going to be, instead of taking things out, you're putting things in. So we have to think about the infrastructure. So I would say that, first off, let's do the math, because the math is always a good place to start. But as we're doing the math on what we can actually predict or can actually determine, let's get that. Let's think across those three dimensions. And then we can overlay the other things, which are very important to overlay, the social cost, all those other things. Final comment that can bridge all this together is a carbon accounting system that works. And a life cycle analysis, a life cycle assessment is the preferred methodology to do what you're talking about, because it not only covers an entire pathway, but it shows the emissions by the pathway. And it then allows you to not only do direct emissions, but it also allows you to do indirect, or what they call consequential emissions. So you can bring in water, you can bring in land use, you can bring in all those other things. So I would strongly encourage that we don't try to get to the PhD level at Harvard. We're still at elementary school, okay? We've got to build the foundations, we got to build the fundamentals, and then we can work our way up to having these really, really hard but necessary questions. I don't think we can answer them yet, but we have to do some work to be able to answer them.
I don't have anything super smart to say on this one, so you go ahead. No, but I think that the point that I was going to try to make, and building a little bit on what you say, a carbon price alone doesn't solve everything, because it doesn't solve the R&D piece. And you guys in Oxy wouldn't be able to do the direct air capture if you competed with existing technology. So you need something to stimulate R&D, and then you need something else to stimulate existing technologies. And I think you probably need to try and fail on this, CO2 price. But what's important is for the investors that took an investment decision. We're talking billion-dollar investment. Whatever CO2 price was at the time, or the tax credit that was given, need to be grandfathered, because we need that predictability when we do these massive investments. But for the next project, it can be adjusted if for some reason the learning curve have come down, or inflation have come down and steel prices have come down, etc. But grandfathering the existing CO2 price or credit or whatever will be important for us.
Yeah, the thing is that we have a regime in the United States which is supporting these early plants. It works. It's simple to understand. There are consultations going on within ETS schemes in the EU and the UK on the integration of removals into ETS schemes. And the way I think about this is just providing a bridge to extend that period where voluntary buyers can get into this, satisfy their concerns. They have concerns around applicability. Can they buy these, and will they be able to apply them to their obligations? Are they Corsair eligible? So that get that firmly understood. Are they going to be permitted to be transferred under operationalization of Article 6? That's a concern that they have, that they're going to get stuck with something that they've bought, or we could be stuck with something we're trying to sell that we can't move across borders. That needs to get clear. As far as something like integration into a cap and trade system, okay, the cap and trade pricing doesn't support what we're doing, but if you could tell a buyer within that system that they're going to effectively get a discount on the purchase price of the voluntary credit that's equivalent to the cap and trade price, then that's another boost to what we do. That moves us another 100 euros down the curve towards where we need to be, and gives us that much more time to be able to make the innovations that we're working really hard to do on the technical side to get the cost of capture down to something that will meet where the compliance prices are eventually.
Thank you. Last point, again, just transition lens, okay? Just going back to Vijay's 3 points. The policies definitely will inspire the markets, and so you need to support us in developing the right policies. But when you talk of technology, if you really want to just transition, invest in the local R&D. Invest in the technology on the ground where you want to deploy it. Don't fly us. I'm happy I went to MIT and all that, but don't bring it to me in Lagos or in Bayelsa or something like that. And then lastly, allow us to build the infrastructure today to use what we need now that can be used in the future. Let us build infrastructure that can take natural gas today and transition to hydrogen tomorrow, and then we'll be more willing to listen to you to deliver all these technologies of the future. Thank you.
Yes, I think there will be a great deal of overlapping between the industrial policy, whatever you call that, and traditional energy policy, and then security concern, and then some other concerns related to the national priority. We can imagine the outcome of those overlapping or interfaces can produce a positive result for the climate change solutions, or something else. And so far, I see some positive the outcomes we can expect from that overlapping policy dimensions between the industry sector and the energy sector. However, we need to wait and see the how final some final picture that will emerge. In terms of policy, I strongly support Rob's final conclusion about the carbon price is necessary but not sufficient, and he indicated a variety of measures to support the decarbonization pathways. Certainly, you said it all about the policy aspect of the full decarbonization. So thank you very much.
No, of course, thank you all. I mean, I was not looking for a binary answer for my question. I just wanted to make it clear, because sometimes the average public only think one-dimensional. We only need carbon price. But indeed, as you all mentioned, and thank you so much for this, it's not one and only. It's a combi of, and what works better or first or in what order could be regional, could be technology, could be time. So again, thank you so much. Thanks for our friend. We also took some of their time. But thank you so much. Really appreciate it.